been using Google now for a few weeks to create these really fun videos to share with patients, prospective patients on social media.
Right. On economic and monetary union, I stress that we will be ready to move beyond the present position to the creation of the European Monetary Fund and a common community currency we have called a hard equity. But we would not be prepared to agree to set a date for starting the next stage of economic and monetary union before there is any agreement on what that stage should comprise. And I again emphasize that we would not be prepared to have a single currency imposed upon us, nor to surrender the use of the pound sterling as our currency. It is our purpose to retain power and influence of this House and not to denude it of many of the powers. I wonder what the right honourable gentleman's policy is in view of some of the things he said. Would he have agreed to a commitment to extend the community's powers to other supplementary sectors of economic integration without having any definition of what they are? Would he? Because you would have thought he would from what he said. One of them was that the Commission wants to extend its powers and competence into the area of health. We said no, we weren't going to agree to those things. And what he says, he sounded as if he would, for the sake of agreeing, for the sake of being little Sir Echo and saying me too. Would he have agreed to extending qualified majority voting within the Council, to delegating implementing powers to the Commission, to a common security policy, all without any attempt to define or limit them? The answer is yes. He hasn't got a clue about the definition of some of the things he is saying, let alone securing the definition of others. Yes, the Commission does want to increase its powers. Yes, it is a non-elected body, and I do not want the Commission to increase its powers. So of course we are different. Of course the chairman or the president of the Commission, Mr. Gabor, said at a press conference the other day that he wanted the European Parliament to be the democratic body of the community. He wanted the Commission to be the executive, and he wanted the Council of Ministers to be the Senate. No, no, no. Perhaps the Labour Party would give all those things up easily. Perhaps they would agree to a single currency, to total abolition of the pound sterling. Perhaps being totally incompetent with monetary matters, they'd be only too delighted to hand over the whole responsibility, say, to the IMF, to a central bank. The fact is, they have no confidence on money, no confidence on the economy. So yes, the right honourable gentleman would be glad to hand it all over. And what is the point? In trying to get elected to Parliament, only to hand over your sterling and to hand over the powers of this House to Europe.
I'm afraid not agree. That the mark of a single currency is that all other currencies must be extinguished. And not merely extinguished, but that the capacity of other institutions to issue currency has to be extinguished. And that, in the case of the United Kingdom, would involve this Parliament binding its successors in a way which we have hitherto regarded as unconstitutional.
This government has no intention of abolishing the pound sterling. If the hard echo evolved into much, much greater use, that would be a decision for future parliaments and future generations. It would be a decision which could only be taken once, and a decision which should not be approached in this atmosphere, but only after the greatest possible consideration. I believe both Parliament and sterling have served our country and the rest of the world very well. I believe we are more stable and more influential with it. I believe it is an expression of sovereignty. This government believes in the pound sterling.
Dr. David Owen.
Is it not perfectly clear that what was being attempted at Rome was a bounce, and a bounce that led only one way, and that was to a single federal United States of Europe? And is it not vital that in this House, across party lines, it is possible for a Prime Minister to go and make it clear, if necessary, that Britain is prepared to stand alone. We don't relish it, but that if necessary, if we are faced by the imposition by treaty of an obligation to a single currency and a situation which would prevent the enlargement to Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia, Britain would be entitled and right to use the veto.
I totally agree with the right honourable gentleman. That is precisely the stance we took. It is a stance we have taken on many previous occasions. The European monetary system to which we belong, is a system designed for 12 sovereign states in cooperation with one another to come to an exchange rate mechanism. What they're proposing now, an economic and monetary union, is really the backdoor to a federal Europe, and we totally and utterly reflect that. We would have better economic and monetary cooperation, which can be achieved by keeping our sovereignty.
There is no majority in this House for EMU, but is the Prime Minister aware that I attended a conference in Italy last year and an Italian minister spoke to me about EMU? And I said, what if Mrs. Thatcher opposes it? And ungallantly, he laughed out loud. And he said, oh, we've met Mrs. Thatcher many times. She squawks and makes a noise at the beginning, but always comes round and gives way in the end.
Exactly so.
Now, what assurances and guarantees can she give this House today that she will not give way on this issue, as she did give way on the Madrid condition about British inflation before she joined the ERM?
That's what they said, Mr. Speaker, when I was negotiating for a better budget deal for Britain. Twice they and the people in the Commission and our people in the Commission, and we had the presidency of the Commission, advised me to give way. They found out different.
Mr. Speaker, next Wednesday, the doors of this chamber will be closed to black rod as a symbol of the independence of this House. What will be the effect of the independence of this House and the nation which elects it if the power to veto proposals affecting social affairs, environment, and taxation were to be removed?
Mr. Speaker, I hope that when the next election comes, people who want to come to this House will come to uphold its powers and its responsibilities and not to denude this House of them. We have surrendered some of them to the community. In my view, we have surrendered enough.
Is the Prime Minister aware that what we're really discussing is not a matter of economic management, but the whole future of the relations between this country and Europe? Are the British people, when they vote in a general election?
Hello, everyone. You might have gotten the SMS message from university that you should have anyway, that at the last moment, face-to-face classes have been canceled because of a coronavirus outbreak. So we're online, and I think I might send another message to our students, who I hope are understanding what the situation is. So let me do the screen share, and also we'll do attendance at this time. So I will go to student monitoring and click on message. And I already sent a number of messages, 2 messages to the students. No face-to-face class today. Class today due to coronavirus outbreak. So everything is online. And so I'll send that, and that's the 3rd message that I've sent. So, I don't know what more I can do here. Oh, what's this? Got another message. What's this? Yeah. And so this person wants to reply. Yeah. Yeah. No, we do not have class. No, we do not have face-to-face. We do not have face-to-face class today. So let me respond to them here. And all right, so send, and okay, that message is sent. And so let's go back to the class website and go to attendance, and attendance for week 11. So add smart attendance, and the lucky number for you is 673, 673 is your lucky number, 673, 673. And I'll just let that run. Well, since I'm working from my office and using my computer, I can move a little more quickly than I can with the classroom computer. So while I'm here, let me show you what's been on my mind these last few days. I told you that there was an online virtual conference that's now underway. This is the organization, the Association for Slavic East European Eurasian Studies Association. And so typically every November I go to the US for this conference, but it's of course been canceled. At least the face-to-face has been canceled. So everything is virtual online. And you can see here the schedule. It was last week. It was started on, let's see here, on November 5th. And it went through the weekend until Monday when I taught you. So that it starts up again tomorrow at 10 p.m. 10 p.m. my time. So if I go to November 14, which is Saturday, they start at 8 in the morning, which is 10 o'clock p.m. my time. So I will come in and I'll stay up. I'll try to attend all night tomorrow night to this for these meetings that go from 10 o'clock till midnight our time, and then because we're 14 hours ahead of U.S. time, 2 a.m. And so I pick one of these Zoom panels to attend and log in and attend them. So that's what I'll be doing Saturday and Sunday night. So when I see you on Monday, I will not be fully. I will have a little problem with sleep, but I should do okay because the last day for that, of course, is Sunday, Monday, our time. So that's what I've been working on. And it's been going fairly well. Everything is on Zoom. There's only one time we had some technical problems, but it's the technical issues have been very, very minor, and it's been a good conference session. So that's what I'm working on. I'm also working on some other panels and papers. You can see that I have another paper to send out for another conference coming up that's next weekend, a week from tomorrow. A week from tomorrow is another virtual conference that I have to attend. So everything is virtual. All right, so let's go back to the class lesson plan. And I have to make sure that that is showing the screen. So I showed you, okay, before I forget, you can see we have a class debate today, Democracy in the European Union. And to South Koreans, the European Council determines what the parameters of democratic political participation should mean in the European Union. And I wrote some comments in response to your paragraphs, and we'll do that in the second hour. And then, but I started off before the start of the class by showing you again that Margaret Thatcher video from, I think, 1990 or 1991, in which she's prime minister declaring that the European Commission, under the European Commission president at the time, the legendary Jacques Delors, had plans for, as Margaret Thatcher said, the European Parliament to become the democratically elected House of the European Union, and the Council of Ministers, or what's now called the Council of the European Union, would be the Senate. And that brings to mind, so here's, by the way, here's the entry for Jacques Delors, the legendary Commission president, maybe the most influential president of the European Commission ever. He was president of the European Commission while the European Union was preparing for the collapse of communism, and the you can see from 1985 until 1995, and he's still around. He's quite aged, 95 years old, but he's still with us, and so she was commenting upon how that was the plan for Margaret Thatcher was commenting about how Jacques Delors indicated that was the plan that they had for the European Union to move more in the direction of a bicameral legislature with the Council of the European Union, or the Council of Ministers, that used to be called, being the European Parliament. I mean, sorry, being the Senate, the equivalent of a Senate or House of Lords in the British parliamentary system, and then the European Parliament being the directly elected branch of the legislature, a two-house legislature, and of course the British were not ultimately persuaded that they were participating adequately in the European Union, as evidenced by Brexit, the vote that happened in 2016, and that was officially formalized at the end of January of this year, so 9 months ago. And then, of course, the world changed with the COVID-19 pandemic, and what the European Union and Britain will agree in terms of their trade relationship is being negotiated now. And we really don't know at this time what will be the relationship of the British to the European Union. But clearly the British public was persuaded by appeals of pro-Brexit leaders that they were not adequately represented, that their interests, including their identity values, were not adequately protected or not adequately promoted within the European Union. In other words, that European Union political participation was unsatisfactory, that their political participation in the so-called democratic European Union that strives so hard to look like a typical European liberal democratic constitution is not a satisfactory way for them to govern themselves and participate in European affairs. So, and what I wanted to call to mind, remind us about that video that I showed you is that there was a statement early on where Margaret Thatcher is mocking the Labour Party opposition, which is in their video, where she makes the comment about how the Labour Party advocates or claims, because she's Conservative Party leader and Prime Minister, advocates the Britain cooperating and integrating further with the European Union to surrender British sovereignty. And she makes a comment, I don't know if I can find it here, about how the Labour Party agree, yes, here it is, to the Labour government agreeing to an IMF program that sacrificed British sovereignty. And the reason I mention this is because this was a very traumatic, politically traumatic episode in British modern history, that the British economic problems that had been intensifying since the end of World War II had gotten so bad that the British had a balance of payments crisis as they were trying to maintain the high value of the British pound in world currency markets, because the British pound was a symbol of British power and authority in the world after the British Empire formally had gone away. British government strove so hard to keep the value of the pound at a steady value that it had balance of payments difficulties, and it actually had to go to the IMF in the early 1970s and request a loan and a debt crisis. Like something like what South Korea went through in 1998. Most Koreans know about the debt IMF crisis involving South Korea. Britain had an episode with that, and this was considered to be humiliating. From a nationalistic point of view, remember we talk a lot in this class about nationalism. From a nationalistic point of view, this was considered to be humiliating for the British, that they, like Turkey or a developing world country in Africa or Asia, had the mighty British United Kingdom, the mighty British state, the superpower of the 19th century, had to go to the IMF and submit to the will of the IMF in terms of conditionality, in the IMF demanding certain reforms in the British economic, fiscal, and monetary policies in return for getting a loan from the IMF in order to cover their balance of payments difficulties. And so Britain, mighty Britain, had fallen to an equivalent status with with developing countries that are typically portrayed as countries that need the IMF, not modern, developed, powerful countries. You will never see the United States or France or Germany go to the IMF, but the British had to go and get a loan from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, because they had a balance of payments crisis. And she highlights that that was a humiliation to the British, Margaret Thatcher, and that surrendering sovereignty to what was then the European Community, which would soon become the European Union, would be a similar humiliation to the British. And she is refusing to do it. And this appeal to the IMF by the British government happened under the Labour Party. And this, she viewed this as a humiliating episode for the British. And of course, this all seemed historically relevant, but something in the past. But then this notion of British pride and sovereignty emerged in Brexit to finally leave the European Union. And she and her government, Margaret Thatcher's government under the Conservative Party, in the view of British nationalists, gets the credit for correcting and fixing Britain so that Britain's economic policies were changed in a neoliberal direction, privatizing British state-owned industries like British railroads, British Airlines used to be a state-owned company, is now private, British Steel, British coal mines. She did all of this, broke the power of the trade unions, of the labor unions, particularly the coal miners in Britain. Today, the last coal mine in Britain closed, I think, last year. There are no more coal mines in Britain. They're all gone. Britain's economy began to grow at double the rate of the rest of Western Europe. And of course, with growing income differentiation between the more prosperous people in Britain and the poorer people, but still, nevertheless, the British economy was a relatively stronger achiever than the continental European countries. And she gets credit for that in the view of British nationalists, of your typical British nationalists. The Conservative Party under Margaret Thatcher. And so she's equating submitting to the European community as equivalent to this humiliation of submitting to the IMF in the 1970s, in the early 1970s. So again, this power of nationalism and what political participation means for a nationalist. I highlighted how to British nationalists this was humiliating. I mean, Great Britain was going to, the United Kingdom was going to the IMF for a loan, like countries in Asia and Africa or Latin America, developing countries. This is humiliating, right? And why is it humiliating? Because of the British self-image that they have of them being a first world, first rank power, maybe not equivalent to the United States, but certainly one of the great powers of the world. And they are not in the same category in their thinking as the rest of the world. But when they went to the IMF, that was seen as humiliating, and submitting to the European Union as it more closely integrated increasingly was seen as humiliating, particularly as they came to believe that they didn't need to do that in order to have economic wealth and prosperity under the Thatcher government. And of course, one can say that they are misunderstanding their abilities. They are overestimating their power capabilities compared to other European countries. And they are overestimating their ability to thrive and prosper outside the European Union, at least the supporter of Brexit is. And that we highlighted in an earlier class as a feature of nationalists. They tend to overestimate their relative power capabilities. Nationalists, whether it be German or American or British or Russian or Chinese or Japanese or Italian, they tend to overestimate their relative power capabilities. And they will tend to see a world, as we talked about in other classes in terms of political psychology, in which that belief can be maintained. They see a world that is self-serving. They see a world that serves their wanting to believe that what they want, they can do. So that's why they overestimate their power capabilities, because they overestimate their power to be able to do what they desperately want to do: maintain British sovereignty, keep British sovereignty separate from the European Union, keep Britain a powerful player in world affairs, equal with any other European actor, if not equal to the United States, but maybe in league with the United States. And this is a feature of nationalism. As we talked about in this class, I've emphasized in my classes that my classes are really studies in perception, in patterns of perception that people have and people collectively in groups show. And we talked about how people show patterns of stereotyping in their perceptions. You can identify the stereotypes and conspiracy theories that they tend to believe in and manifest in their world views and their actions, because how we perceive the world determines how we act in the world, right? How we perceive the world determines our actions, our policy choices. And so this British belief that, yeah, of course, everybody in Britain understands that Britain is not as big and powerful as the United States, but of course they claim that the British have some kind of special relationship, with the United States, and that as I look for here my bargaining leverage. Yes, here it is, right? I showed you, I showed in other classes, right? Let me see if I can open this here. The British nationalists, let me go back to sharing screen. British nationalists are prone to overestimate the relative power capability. So I don't want to talk too much about this now, but this is a list of bargaining levers that diplomats use when they bargain and negotiate with each other, representing their different countries, right? So as I try to persuade, the United States attempts to persuade China, or let's say this, let's stick with Britain, that I'm trying to persuade the British government to stay in the European Union, or to compromise in a trade agreement with the European Union if I represent the European Union. The perceived ability to influence third countries is one of the levers that we use as we try to influence each other. So the British might say, well, European Union, you have to be more accommodating to what we British want as we come up with a new free trade agreement between Britain and European Union, because we have a special connection with the United States. And we don't need the European Union as much as you think, European Union, because we have a special relationship. That's the term, that Britain has a special relationship going back to World War I, at least, if not earlier, with Great Britain, when the United States intervened in World War I on the side of the British, and then in World War II, and then after Britain declined, the United States took Britain's place, supposedly in the Middle East and the Eastern Mediterranean during the Cold War, right? But still, the United States is like the most successful offspring of Great Britain, and so Great Britain has a special relationship. And now that Donald Trump was encouraging Brexit, that Donald Trump, like Boris Johnson in Britain, is a nationalist, and who is therefore, by definition, suspicious of threats to American or British sovereignty, depending upon if you're talking about Trump or Johnson. Donald Trump has been supportive of Brexit, encouraging Britain to leave the European Union, and promising the British that if they leave the European Union, that they can make an FTA, a new free trade agreement with the United States. And Boris Johnson was advocating that, or using that in his political campaign inside Britain, and appealing to British voters that we can leave the European Union because we have lots of other options. We have our connections with our former British colonies, our empire, India, Australia, but we also have a special relationship with the United States, and the United States will make a free trade agreement with Britain, and we don't need the European Union. We can work more closely with our offspring, like the United States, our descendant that came from the British Empire. And that was a factor which Boris Johnson was able to use this leverage to get the European Union to be willing to compromise with Britain, because, of course, if Britain just leaves the European Union, it's not only going to hurt the British economy, it's going to hurt the European economy as well, right? because of the economic interconnections between Britain and the rest of the European Union. So now Trump has lost the election on November 3rd of this month. And consequently, this lever that the British and Boris Johnson government of Great Britain has had, this diplomatic bargaining lever that Boris Johnson has had in negotiation with the European Union in Brussels is now weaker. So the media commentary I just listened to this morning is noting that Boris Johnson is more likely going to have to compromise in a direction favoring the European Union on this new FTA, free trade agreement, between the United Kingdom and the European Union, because Boris Johnson understands that Joe Biden is not supportive of Brexit, did not support Brexit. Joe Biden opposed Brexit. Joe Biden wanted Britain to stay in the European Union when he was vice president. Joe Biden is supportive of Ireland, that Joe Biden claims to be Irish, and the European Union is very important, and European integration is very important for maintaining peace in Ireland between the Protestants and the Catholics on the island of Ireland, between Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom, and the Republic of Ireland, the rest of the Irish island, and that the Good Friday Agreement that formally ended the civil war going on between the Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland is threatened by Brexit if Brexit does not include accommodations for keeping Northern Ireland of the United Kingdom integrated into the single European market, beginning with Ireland, which is right next door, right? The Republic of Ireland. So the point is that with the election of Joe Biden, this bargaining lever that Boris Johnson of the British government was using in negotiating with Brussels has become weaker, because he cannot rely upon the support of the United States as much under Biden for supporting Britain in leaving the European Union. Okay, so so I just wanted to highlight that these current events are affecting negotiations regarding Britain's relationship with the European Union, even as we speak. The election of Joe Biden defeating Donald Trump has weakened Britain's bargaining leverage in negotiating a new free trade agreement with the European Union, so that Britain will be more likely to be more accommodating in compromising with the European Union on what this final agreement will be. We don't know what will be until the end of the year, until the end of next month, what the new FTA, free trade agreement between Britain and the European Union will look like. Okay, so all right, so let me go back to the notes and our class here and close that and go back and so get this bar out of the way. Yeah, okay, we go European Union, and let's see, what else do we want to highlight here in the lesson plan? Okay, stop share and screen share, and here, share. Okay, so so democracy in the European Union, all right, so let's open in the rules, the notes for the for chapter 7, and here we go, all right, so and that's highlighted in chapter 7 notes of the textbook, comparing the European Union with liberal democratic governments of European states, because that's what your typical student reading this textbook in Britain or the United States would imagine. What does democracy look like? Well, it looks like what exists in Britain. Democratic political system looks like what exists in Germany. A democratic political system looks like what exists in the United States. So how does the European Union compare with those state constitutional systems in Europe and North America? And okay, so they note that the European Union has an elected parliament, and that's a good thing, right? And that, of course, you know, addressing what is this notion of a democratic deficit. And so, but the European Union is different. It's not the same, or it's not, of course, obviously the same as a national state government. But when we look for models about how do we address this issue of the democratic deficit, what do we do? What do we do to convince Europeans that we're reducing the democratic deficit? We're making the European Union more and more democratic. The response has typically been, well, we try to move the European Union more in a direction that looks like a European liberal democratic constitution. But as we saw in the YouTube clip from Margaret Thatcher, that even that is considered a threat in the view of nationalists in Europe. And but the authors of the textbook want to highlight that sure, the European Union is an international organization, but it has much more democratic participation in it than any other international organizations like the IMF, the International Monetary Fund that we just were talking about, or the World Trade Organization, or the World Bank, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and other more informal organizations like the G8 and the G20. The European Union policymaking process is different, and it's different, they claim, from the policymaking processes in these organizations, in that the agreements among these states requires that all states must agree. All states must agree in the World Trade Organization, right? When the World Trade Organization decides on a policy. In the International Monetary Fund, there is a governing board, and the different states have more power and more voting voice than the other states. And the United States can veto the International Monetary Fund from doing anything that the United States doesn't want it to do because of its power. So the International Monetary Fund is probably never going to give a loan, for example, to Iran, because the United States won't allow it. Or the World Bank or the United Nations. But the claim is made here that the way the European Union makes policy as an international organization is different in that it doesn't have to be, the policy is not the result of what everybody will agree on in the European Union. The Parliament plays an important role. It directly represents the citizens, and it has, in the ordinary legislative procedure, formally equal voice with the Council, it also involves the parties in all of the member states. This should now, of course, be 27. All of the member states have a governing organization. They have a government that's controlled typically by a party or a coalition of parties, and there's an opposition in their political opposition parties that are in their parliaments, that are in their national assemblies. The European Parliament brings all of those parties together through the direct election within the member states of representatives to the European Parliament, that typically those representatives to the European Parliament coming from Germany or elected from Italy or elected from France are chosen from the political parties inside France, or the political parties inside Germany, or in political parties inside Italy. So you have the opposition parties who are not controlling the government in Germany, like the Social Democratic, well, they're in the government, Marine Le Pen. Marine Le Pen's party, the National Rally Party in France, is not in the French, obviously it's not in the French government, but Marine Le Pen and her National Rally Party are represented in the European Parliament, along with French representatives from Macron's movement and the other parties in France. That's different. I mean, there's really nothing else like that in terms of international organizations. Does that make Europeans happy? I mean, we saw how Nigel Farage, United Kingdom Independence Party, actually used the European Parliament as a platform to promote Brexit, to attack British and undermine British membership in the European Union. That's really unusual. I mean, that's really different. That's really original. I mean, in terms of other international organizations. So yeah, the European Union is based upon treaty agreements between the member states. We talk about the Treaty of Lisbon, the Treaty of Maastricht, the Treaty of Paris that founded the coal and steel community, the Treaty of Rome that founded the European communities, you know, and treaties founded the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and treaties founded the United Nations, and treaties founded, a treaty founded the World Trade Organization. But the European Union is an international organization that has lots more, many more opportunities for participation by those actors that feel that they are not adequately represented by their national government in the European Union. European Union policymakers take decisions on legislation publicly, you know, so, you know, the Parliament is a public body, right? And it's supposedly equal with the Council of Ministers of the European Union. The European Council is the meetings of the prime ministers and presidents, the heads of state and government in the European Union. And it issues agreements or notes about what it decided, but its deliberations are not public. So there's a difference. When the European Council meets, and it meets at least twice every 6 months, usually more, in these times of crisis and change in the European Union, the European Council, they meet and it is not public. Its meetings are not open to public viewing, the way the European Parliament sessions and council meetings are open to public viewing by people there on the internet, right? That doesn't happen. Journalists are not present in the European Council meetings. So what does that tell you if you're a European citizen? What does it tell you if you're a European nationalist? And nationalists already are prone to see conspiracies and be suspicious of threats to sovereignty. On the other hand, the European Commission is not directly controlled by the member states. And the European Commission, which claims to be the executive branch of the European Union, is not directly controlled, but obviously it's still influenced by what the member states want. I mean, clearly, the European Commission is going to be listening and talking and dialoguing with all of the powerful actors, the Parliament, the member states, the European Council, but it's not directly controlled by the European Council. And it can vote by majority vote if it has to in deciding what the European Commission will do or propose as legislation, because as you know, the European Commission has the monopoly on the right of initiating new European Union laws, legislation to become laws as proposed laws in the ordinary legislative procedure. And the commissioners are accountable, politically accountable to the Parliament. The Parliament can fire the European Commission. It hasn't done it, but the European Commission has resigned because the European Parliament was getting ready to fire the Jacques Santer Commission. Jacques Santer was the president of the European Commission after Jacques Delors stepped down. He was replaced by Jacques Santer, a former Luxembourg prime minister. And he the Jacques Santer Commission, I think, resigned in 1999, I believe it was. I have to check on that. The European Union has a common court. So come on, European citizens, see how democratic the European Union is? Some of you make that point in your essays, right? That the claim is you can't have a democracy unless you have a demos, unless you have a European people. Like you can't have a German democracy unless you have a German people, because the people have to feel that they all belong. I mean, think about what that means. What are you saying when you make that statement? That you cannot have a democracy unless you have a demos. In other words, everybody who exists in our political group, in our political community, we feel that we are part of this community and this is most important to us. And when the community decides to do something, we feel in our democratic political system that Angela Merkel as Chancellor of Germany or Emmanuel Macron as President of France, that he has the right to tell me, a citizen of France, what to do. And I should obey. And even if I will not obey, I should expect to be punished. And I will not be surprised if I am punished. If I am caught not paying my taxes, for example, I have to pay my taxes, even if I don't like it. And the French government has the right to tell me that I have to pay taxes. And I might be angry and hostile about it, but I will not be surprised if I hide this fact that I am disobeying, and that I will be embarrassed if I am caught, and I will submit to punishment because we're French. And we recognize that Emmanuel Macron and the leaders of France, as determined through elections and our constitution, have the right to speak in the imperative voice. They have the right to speak with the voice of command over us because we're all French. And Emmanuel Macron and the French government are the leaders of the French. But what does it mean to be the leaders of the European Union? Is there a European demos that is more important than the French demos? Not yet. Will it emerge? Maybe. Will the European Union admit that it wants to create a European demos? No. Because they don't want to give more political ammunition to militant nationalists like Marine Le Pen and Nigel Farage. But you might be suspicious that that's what they want to do. They want to create a European demos that overrides national demos of Italy and France and Germany and Bulgaria and Greece. Like how the American demos has superseded and gone beyond the original colonies that founded the 13 colonies that created the United States. So that there is an American demos and state identities, California, New York, Texas identities. Those are just important for football games and basketball games. And so some of you pointed out in your essays, right, that the European Union aims to promote a habit, a normative, habitual pattern of development so that over the years, decades, generations, that there will emerge an orientation and an attitude towards addressing community issues and problems and conflicts within us in a way that we understand that there is a European way of doing that, and we have primary allegiance to that European way of solving our problems so that we accept the outcome even if we do not like it. We submit to the outcome even if we do not like it. That's the indicator that a demos has emerged. That I feel like I should obey, even if I don't like it. Like I have to pay my taxes. I have to agree to put sanctions on another country. I have to cut my business ties with Belarus, even though I'm making lots of money in Belarus, because the European Union has put sanctions on Belarus for its oppressive policies against its own people. And I'm losing lots of money, but I accept that because I'm a European business person, for example. How do you get people to move in that direction? Well, you create these European institutions that look like national institutions because, well, what else do we have as blueprints for creating a democracy, right? We have what exists in the terms of how the French kingdom, the Kingdom of France became the Republic of France with a democratic constitution, or how the German lands united and became a German federal republic. How did that process of change produce our democracies? That's the experience we have, and that's the experience that people can understand, even if they find it threatening, like Margaret Thatcher. But that, of course, is the words and terms and legal terminology that we use to explain what we're doing, even if something else is happening that is not adequately incorporated in the language and terms and legal terminology of the past. Like, how do you deal with global interdependency? How do you deal with global climate change? How do you deal with global transnational issues that we all recognize exist, but it wasn't really something that we thought about before the 20th century? Global climate change, right? Economic development for the country through international trade. These are all modern trends which the development of the French Republic or the German Republic didn't really grapple with as primary issues that they have to address in creating their French Constitution, the Fifth Republic. But if we're going to address global climate change or the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, we have to think of new ways of politically interacting with people in our nation and outside of our nation in cooperative methods of conflict resolution, which require new thinking. But we still have to build on what exists in order to create something new on that foundation. And the European Union is all about that, right? About accommodating peacefully globalization. Accommodating peacefully globalization. At least as it applies to one region of the world, Europe. And hopefully the European Union has lessons to teach the rest of the world, including the United States. Sometimes these efforts, these lessons are explicitly highlighted. The African Union explicitly is formulated on the experience of the European Union. Of course, with differences, because African states are not like European states. They're different in many fundamental ways. Or ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Those states are also different from European states, very, very different. African states, Asian states are multi-ethnic states with post-colonial borders. They're not like the Republic of France that emerged with more or less established boundaries set by the Kingdom of France, or the same with the English state, Great Britain emerging on the basis of the British Great Britain, for example. These are different kinds of states, but they do try to learn from the European Union in trying to come up with peaceful methods of regional cooperation and collaboration to address conflicts that can be quite violent and are quite violent among the different ethnic groups and conflicts among these ethnic groups in these post-colonial states in Africa and Asia. Yeah, so some of you argue that a democratic political system can be successful only if a common feeling of belonging to the same community characterizes the citizens. What is that common feeling of belonging to the same community? You know, and that's about as far as we go in the study of nationalism. At least that prevails in the political science field. I told you, I have a way of understanding that, the way I was fortunate to study when I was in school. This is the book that tries to make sense in a scientific way, this, quote, common feeling of belonging to the same community. What does that mean? I know what it means. I know what it means. I think I have some idea what it means. For most people in Europe, the demos in democracy still applies to their nation, not the people of Europe, but a common shared European identity is emerging. Yeah, we hope, we think. Usually you only know these things not through surveys. Excuse me, Antoine Jumel, do you feel European? And you say, yeah, a demos, see, European demos is emerging. No, typically people's identity values or values overall, you know, when they have to make a difficult choice. They have to sacrifice something, in other words, whatever they choose when they face a dilemma or conflict issue, and they have to choose A or B. If they choose B, they're going to sacrifice something very valuable for B. Or if they choose A, they're going to sacrifice something very valuable for A in order to protect and promote A. And you see that nationalists will do that. And they will come up with self-serving justifications and convince themselves, as well as you and me, that, oh, well, Britain will thrive when it leaves the European Union. It will be wonderful. And they'll make themselves believe that. But we outside observers are seeing these British people are going to sacrifice economic growth and prosperity that they otherwise would have by leaving the European Union. And that is an indicator that British nationalism is powerful, because they're going to sacrifice a lot of profit that they otherwise would have gained. Nationalists sacrifice economic profit. When nationalism prevails in a country's policymaking process, collective interest group behavior, economic interest group behavior that we talked about in a previous class, right? Group theory approach to policymaking, class approach, and elite approach. Interest group approach will not characterize the policymaking, will not dominate the policymaking process. Those economic interests of the interest groups will be sacrificed for the pursuit of national sovereignty in a time of perceived threat or a time of perceived opportunity, intense opportunity. Typically during a time of crisis, And I keep coming back to this point in my other classes, right? We're now in a time of crisis, the global pandemic. So stay tuned for more nationalism, because that's when nationalist behavior emerges. Collective nationalist behavior emerges during times of accelerated rapid change, and that's what a crisis involves. Accelerated rapid change. So the European Union treaties, they set out a framework and a rule book for EU policymaking. And some have claimed that the treaties are de facto a constitution of the European Union. Okay. But the attempt to let's all come together, Europeans, and formally integrate all of the treaties and rewrite them and call it a constitution. That Constitution Treaty, negotiated in 2004, failed. It failed to be ratified by the French and then the Dutch, because they required in the French Constitution and the Dutch Constitution that the French people and the Dutch people had to vote through a referendum on whether or not to approve that treaty. And they said no. That tells you, at least in 2004, the modal French citizen was not a European in terms of their primary self-identity. Their primary self-identity was still French. In other words, the European demos does not yet predominate in the territory of what we call France today. Yet. Will it? We'll see. So how do you make the European Union more democratically accountable? How do you overcome the democratic deficit? Debates continue about whether to focus on achieving EU democratic accountability through reliance on democratically chosen governments in each member state, or alternatively by relying more on the European Parliament, or a combination of both, right? I mentioned that point to you in some of your essays, right? That a famous German political theoretician named Jürgen Habermas, some of you might have heard of him, Jürgen Habermas. He's a quite elderly old man. He says the European Union has a dual sovereignty system, that it represents the sovereignty of the nations through the European Council and the Council of the European Union, and the sovereignty of the people through the European Parliament. And that the European Union is a dual two-sovereignty system. And that's an accommodation of the fact that still Europeans still have strong primary national self-identifications. So you have to do both. But of course, Jürgen Habermas says, but to really move more fully in the direction of the European Union becoming truly more democratic, we have to abolish the unanimous vote requirement on some policy areas that still apply in the European Council. In other words, we should move to qualified majority voting in everything that the Council approaches. The Council should use qualified majority voting, QMV, in everything, including common foreign and security policy, to make European Union more democratically appealing. Well, maybe, but again, you risk a backlash. Jürgen Habermas was arguing these points in articles written just as recently 5 years ago. Then the Brexit vote happened, and the British voted to leave, even though there is no requirement that everything in the European Council and the Council of Ministers must be through qualified majority voting. Supposedly, I did read one statement, one claim that one of the instigators of David Cameron leading the British Conservative Party in government in 2014 to agree to have a referendum in Britain on Brexit if they won the election in 2015, which they did in Britain, and so they had the Brexit vote in 2016, he was upset that the European Council moved to approve Jean-Claude Juncker as the president of the European Commission. Jean-Claude Juncker, former Luxembourg prime minister, was the president of the European Commission before the current president, obviously Ursula von der Leyen. And David Cameron did not want Jean-Claude Juncker to be the Commission president, and the Council of the European Union, the European Council voted through a form of majority vote to force Juncker to be selected over the objections of the British government. And the British were upset about that. Jean-Claude Juncker represented the conservative right of center parties and movements in the European Parliament. He had the majority support of the European Parliament, and the European Parliament wants to improve its power, improve its authority, increase its authority in the European Union. So they demanded that the European Council select as the president of the European Commission that person who has the strongest amount of support in the European Parliament, because the European Commission president, as the leader of the executive branch, should represent the will of the majority of the members of the parliament, just like in Germany or Italy, right? Or Britain. And so the European Council agreed to that, what's called the Spitzenkandidat, it's just German term, that the person nominated and selected to be president of the European Commission should be the person who has majority support of the European Parliament members. And David Cameron didn't like that. And the reason why this is interesting is because Jean-Claude Juncker was controversial. He was good, but he had some problems. Namely, many people claiming he had a problem with alcohol. And there were episodes where he looks like he's got problems publicly. And the British Prime Minister and the British, see, Nigel Farage, see, this is the leader of the European Union, Jean-Claude Juncker. I can show you the video. Let me show you the video of some of the, I didn't show them in class because they were kind of, we didn't have time, but if I show you,
다음 날이 걱정이라면 얘를 부르세요. 이슬. 참이슬.
So that's the president of the European Commission. Before Ursula von der Leyen, selected by the will of the European Parliament and forced upon Britain by a majority vote of the European Council in 2014. Now, he was a good guy, he was effective, he was a good politician, but you think Emmanuel Macron would stay president of France if he ever did something like this in public?
Det var en uppspelt Jean-Claude Juncker som hälsade deltagarna i toppmötet i Riga förra veckan välkomna. Först fick EU-kommissionären Cecilia Malmström en liten tillrättavisning. Sen var det dags för statsminister Stefan Löfven att få en örfil. Och på den vägen fortsätter. Sen skulle slipsarna hjälpas. Och Ungerns premiärminister Viktor Orbán kallade Juncker helt enkelt för diktator. Det franska tv-programmet Le Petit Journal sammanfattade mottagningen så här på 20 sekunder.
Le dictateur arrive, dit-il, et le voici.
So to go back to our story here, in the case of Ursula von der Leyen, she was not nominated by a majority of the European Parliament to be the next president of the European Commission. So the European Council explicitly went out of its way to no longer follow the Spitzenkandidat system. I think maybe there must be a Wikipedia entry for that. Let's see if I can find it without wasting too much time here. A Spitzenkandidat system for choosing just to show you that there is an entry for it, if you want to look it up. Well, there is the current president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and she was not chosen by, yeah, there's the Spitzenkandidat system right there. So Spitzenkandidat is a process of the method of linking European Parliament elections by having each major political group in Parliament nominating their candidate for European Commission president prior to the parliamentary elections. The Spitzenkandidat of the largest party would then have a mandate to assume the Commission presidency. This process was first run in 2014 with Jean-Claude Juncker, and its legitimacy was contested by the Council. And so that's how Jean-Claude Juncker got to be president of the European Commission. And Ursula von der Leyen was not selected in this way. She was the former defense minister of Germany. She was nominated by the European Council, and she was not a person who, I don't think she was even a member of the European Parliament. And I think it was reaction to the case of Juncker and the British, because the British would say, see, we told you, this person should not have been, Jean-Claude Juncker should not have been made president of the European Commission. The European Council should not have nominated him, even though the European Parliament wanted him. So, but again, how to make the European Union more attractive and appealing to European citizens. So, debates continue about whether to focus on achieving European Union democratic accountability through reliance on democratically chosen governments in each member state, alternatively by relying more on the European Parliament. Okay, so I already went through that, right? So having the European Parliament, approve, and the European Parliament still has to approve the Commission president who is nominated by the European Council, and they have to approve the entire new European Commission. And European Parliament resisted and were hostile to Ursula von der Leyen. But then, of course, the European Union member states used their influence over the European Parliament members to get them to fall in line and get the European Parliament to approve Ursula von der Leyen as Commission president in the entire European Commission. So, so is the European Union developing a two-house bicameral legislature? That's the idea, right? Like you see in Germany or France or Italy, these democratic European countries have a two-house or bicameral legislative system. And the aim is to promote democratic legitimacy at the national level. And the European Parliament is directly elected by all of the European Union citizens. And whereas the Council of the European Union, its representatives are elected by each national member state. So qualifications regarding the European Union as a democratic political system. The European Union does not rely on simple majoritarian rule, right? The majority voting in the Council of the European Union is not simple majority voting. Still, there must be a majority of population. So for the member states to approve a proposal in the Council, like for example, to ban the term veggie burgers, that the term veggie burgers is applied to sandwiches without any burger in them, without any meat, would have required that 65% of the European Union's population, as represented by the member states in the Council, would approve that. So you have to have 65% of the European Union's population in favor of something for the Council of the European Union, the Council of Ministers, to approve a proposal. Similarly, we already covered how the European Parliament allows Malta, the smallest member of the European Union, to have one representative for every approximately what is it, 80,000 citizens of Malta in a country that's only 500,000 people at most, whereas Germany has a member of the European Parliament for millions of, no, 800,000 citizens. So again, there is not direct proportional representation. And that's, of course, a compromise that Germany and the big member states have to make to convince the European small member states, the small European member states, they're not being at risk of being devoured and swallowed up by the big member states. Okay, let me see. What do I have here in terms of activities that we can do? Polling. Okay. So let's see. It is now almost 10 after 6. So I have a few polls set up here, and so let's go to an exercise. And let's look at, oh, I don't have a, okay, here's an exercise for democratic deficit. So this is that article I highlighted, that report I highlighted a year ago about supposed corruption in the European Common Agricultural Policy. So this is an editorial in the New York Times, the most influential newspaper in the United States, criticizing the European Union's allowance of the member state governments to use the money that the European Union provides for the Common Agricultural Policy in a way as they decide how to use it, right? So a New York Times investigation of the bloc's lavish farm subsidies demonstrates in shocking detail the governments of several formerly communist Eastern European states have also cynically taken advantage of the union's largesse through opaque deals, feeding a new crisis of land barons. Perhaps even more galling is that the European Union knows all this, but prefers not to see or hear about the corruption for fear of upsetting the precarious bonds that hold the union together. And what are those precarious bonds? The economic benefits that the leaders gain is one source of the bonds, and including the leaders of Hungary, like Prime Minister Viktor Orban of Hungary, or the leaders of Poland, or the leaders of Bulgaria. One of the cardinal rules of the bloc is to defer to national leaders as much as possible. That principle of proportionality and subsidiarity, right? That the European Union says, European Union only gets involved in a policy area if the member states themselves are unable to deal with it and decide to give the European Union authority. So one of the cardinal rules of the bloc is to defer to national leaders as much as possible to avoid just the sort of charges of infringing on national sovereignty that populist leaders across Europe and Brexiteers in Britain are so fond of making. Yet the Common Agricultural Policy, a mainstay of the Union from its founding, is the biggest item in its central budget, accounting for about 40% of expenditures, or about $65 billion. Its mechanisms and focus have been regularly challenged and altered, but the fundamental notion of protecting the rural way of life has remained at its heart. Without effective oversight, however, the funds allocated to the bloc's newest members, all provided by European taxpayers, have often become a lavish slush fund for political insiders, helping them amass wealth and consolidate power. The examples cited in the Times study are appalling. In the Czech Republic, the Prime Minister Andrej Babis is a billionaire whose companies collected at least $42 million in agricultural subsidies last year. In Bulgaria, the Academy of Sciences found that 100 entities collect 3/4 of the main type of the union's agricultural subsidies. In Slovakia, the top prosecutor has acknowledged the existence of an agricultural mafia, and a journalist investigating the infiltration of the farm industry by Italian mobsters was murdered last year. And of course, Hungary, where Mr. Orban arranged for political allies and family members to buy up land owned by the former communist nation and to collect rich European Union subsidies on it. Then at political rallies, he assails the European Union for seeking to strip away from farm aid and use the money to bring in migrants. There are many reasons that crony capitalism has found fertile soil in former communist countries, not least among them a cavalier attitude towards defrauding the state that was prevalent in the secretive centralized systems of the Soviet bloc. So blame communism, right, for these problems. That's the fallback position. Leaders like Mr. Orban have also exploited a widespread sense in Central Eastern European societies of being patronized and ignored by the richer democracies to the West, and of being pushed towards socially progressive attitudes that still seem alien and decadent in the East. This makes it easy for populist politicians to depict European Union policies as the successor to communist diktat, like, for example, LGBTQ rights, allowing gay people to marry, while treating its handouts as their due. The CAP money, the agricultural subsidies is their due, an approach similar to that of American conservatives who rail against socialism, but regard ethanol credits or the oil depletion allowance as their entitlement. But the European Union's see no evil approach to the misuse of billions in taxpayer funds is an unnecessary, patronizing, and self-defeating concession to the new members. It's a payoff to corrupt leaders to keep them in the European camp, even as they blithely defy the bloc's policies on immigration, rule of law, and corruption. And so, of course, Hungarians like Josef Angyan criticize Prime Minister Orban and highlight the use of the CAP, Common Agricultural Policy money, to enrich the friends of Viktor Orban. But yet, instead of standing behind reformers like Mr. Angyan, European Union officials regularly reject efforts to make the subsidy system more accountable and transparent. The officials actively concealed data sought by the Times reporters. So the New York Times reporters went to the European Union and asked them for the data about who is getting the Common Agricultural Policy money in these countries and how is it being spent. And the European Union has the data, but they won't give it to the New York Times reporters. So they actively concealed data sought by the Times reporters, claiming either that it didn't exist or that it was too cumbersome to produce, and actually kept tabs on the investigation. So they hid what Viktor Orban and the others are doing. The European Union officials in Brussels. The response of the union's officials, once the Times investigation was published a few days earlier, was that their job was not to do the work of national governments and that they were acting precisely within our powers. That may be given current rules, but it should not prevent European Union commissioners and legislators from raising questions about how public funds are distributed and seeking rules that would address the worst abuses. So, please respond to the following statement. The problems with the Common Agricultural Policy highlighted here, that are highlighted in this report, show that the European Union has a democratic deficit. So do you strongly agree or strongly disagree? So let me go back to the poll. Launch poll. So please take the poll. Please respond to the following statement. The problems with the CAP highlighted here show that the EU has a democratic deficit. Thirty seconds. $15 seconds. Okay, and the results are, you see the results. Most of you agree that there's a problem. It's difficult. There are no easy answers to these issues, right? I mean, one of the benefits of this policy is that it, and I should have highlighted the screen here, is that it makes nationalists like Viktor Orban have an incentive to continue to cooperate and participate in the European Union, even when the European Union is also telling Hungary and Poland and the Czech Republic that, you know, you really should allow gay people to be married and adopt children, which for conservative traditional societies like in Hungary or Poland, this is outrageous. But Viktor Orban and the others, they really like that common agricultural policy and the money that is getting for their allies and supporters. And I think we already talked about this in a previous class, right? That the agricultural sectors in these societies have tremendous changes that they must undergo to reach the level of development of the West European countries. As we already talked about, how when communism fell in these countries in 1989, 1990, a third of the population within them were farmers, 33%, compared to what, 3 or 4% in South Korea or United States of the population in those countries are farmers. So there's going to be tremendous changes in the countryside in these countries. And they're very stressful, very politically dangerous. So trying to order and organize this transformation of the agricultural sector has been the function of the common agricultural policy, to give incentives for people to participate, to make it easier for small, unprofitable farms to be bought and taken over by bigger farms. There has to be an amalgamation of these small land plots into bigger plots to make it easier for that to happen, for people to profit and to be supportive of European integration. And we already covered about how now today that percent of the population has dropped to less than 15% of the population or less in Poland or Bulgaria are now farmers instead of 33% after 30 years. And so, okay, so can you please explain your answer? And so let's then divide up into work groups before we go into our in-class debate. And so let's divide into 4 groups. And these are the 4 groups. So Choi Chun-yok is chair of room 1. Ho Ryung Park is chair of room 2. Lee Sang-moon is chair of group 3. And Yarno is chair of group 4. And remember who you are in terms of your identities and roles. And I'm not certain if you're seeing that screen when I share it. So just to remind you of your roles here. So you are in these 4 groups. And let me open the rooms and explain your answer as to whether or not the common agricultural policy indicates a democratic deficit in the European Union. The problems of the common agricultural policy, the use of the money by the national member state governments to support and enrich their supporters, is that anti-democratic in the European Union? And so please remember who you are as you role play and try to come up with a position as to your group's position on this question and why you come up with that position, that the problems with the CAP highlighted here show that the European Union has a democratic deficit. So those are the groups. So come up with a common statement for Yarno and Lee Sang-moon and Ho Ryung Park and Choi Chun-yok to express. And let's just do this for a few minutes before we go to our group debate. So Chun-yok.
Yes.
Okay. Organize your group. Come up with a statement about whether, explain your group's position on whether or not the problems with the common agricultural policy show that there is a democratic deficit in the European Union. And again, there's no simple, easy answer to that question. I just want people to think about this, okay?
Yep.
All right, bye.
Thank you. 거든요. 정확하게 어떤 내용?
공동 농업 정책 얘기하는 거죠, 지금?
네네.
공동 농업 정책에 관해서 하는 건
Hi, Arno.
Hi, I didn't really get the assignment brief. We just have to comment on the statement you put in the poll.
Yeah, a statement on whether or not you think that the problems with the common agricultural policy indicate a democratic deficit in the European Union.
I'm sorry, but are you pro or con?
No, you're anything. You're on this
Yeah.
agree or cannot decide or.
Well, we have to talk from our point of stance of like
Well,
who
you
we
can role
right?
play, yeah, you can role play, but come up with it. Since the European Union is all about bargaining and negotiation and compromise, you know, you don't want to come up with a position that is strongly in contradiction to your colleagues on your working group.
Okay. All right, thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to find some what the stance of Manfred Weber is on the problems with the agricultural policy.
Okay. Choi Chun-yok. Choi Chun-yok.
Yes.
What's your group statement?
One of our members country is Estonia, and he stated that Estonia is overall satisfied with the EU, and their voices are adequately heard, and they have a healthy environment to talk things through.
Okay, so they're happy with the common agricultural policy in Estonia.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't hear from the Estonian opposition. I mean, we don't hear from the Estonian opposition. I mean, in that article that I showed you highlighted the opposition in Hungary to Prime Minister Viktor Orban's policies being outraged. Mr. Angyan was outraged by what the Hungarian government is doing, but we don't have this outrage in Estonia. So, okay. And again, you know, the point is made by someone like Viktor Orban. He keeps winning re-election. So the Hungarian people must support him. Of course, the response is that, well, he doesn't allow for a free, liberal, democratic civil society, including a free and independent media to work. So he doesn't have policies that allow true democratic political participation in Hungary, because he is trying to undercut the independence of the media and making sure that his cronies and oligarchs, rich cronies, control the media for him. And so the Hungarian political system is not a true representation of the Hungarian will of the Hungarian people. Maybe, maybe not, but that's what the European Union claims. That, well, Hungary doesn't really have a fully democratic political system because the media is not independent from the government, because the prime minister's friends own the newspapers and the television stations, and they do what they can to support the prime minister. And that claim is made in all the East European countries, in Bulgaria, in the former communist countries, that rich oligarch people, often with ties to the old Communist Party or to the old secret police in the communist era, have become the billionaires, the rich people, and they use their money to buy and control the media and suppress opposing points of view. And sometimes they'll even do bad things, like work with criminals who kill their opponents, like those Slovak investigative journalists who were investigating corruption in the Slovak government. And because the Italian mafia was involved with corruption in Slovakia with the agricultural policy, somebody murdered that journalist and his girlfriend. Okay, Horyang Park, what did your group come up with?
Well, we didn't discuss that much because of time limit, but we're kind of neutral, and we're like middle of neutral and agree in between, because it's like we thought some point of it, there's like they working for that democratic system, but also there's some like not working, like some part not going well. So like we thought it's like it's kind of we can see it's kind of democratic deficit, but also like they working, every system has like some side effects, so like it's not always going well. So
good point. Good point. I mean, does South Korea have a democratic deficit? Does the United States have a democratic deficit in its political system? I mean, many people claim, yes, the United States definitely has a democratic deficit. We have this electoral college system whereby someone can lose the popular vote for president and still become president, like Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton got almost 3 million more votes individually than Donald Trump in 2016. Yet because of the electoral college system, Donald Trump became president. Clearly, there's a democratic deficit in the United States, yes? Some people say yes, other people say no, no, no. The electoral college system in the US protects the interests of minorities, because in a liberal political system, it's not just ruled by the majority that counts. You have to protect the rights of the minorities, of the people that are not in power, of the people that are not the majority. And the electoral college system is good. So no, there is not a democratic deficit in the United States. Who's right? Who's correct? One can't really say. But democracy is messy and produces outcomes that usually are not fully happy or pleasing to anyone. But what counts is that people talk and negotiate and not resort to threats of force to resolve their disputes. Okay, Lee Sang-moon, Group 3, what did your group decide?
Yeah, we'll talk about CAP. Especially France and Italy, the major agricultural countries demanded the introduction of this policy in exchange for opening industrial products such as West Germany to Korea. In accordance with this policy, the measures to promote agricultural and restrict imports of agricultural products were abolished, resulting in a unified price of agricultural products in the region. Therefore, barriers to trade in agricultural products between member states have been almost eliminated. Hungary is difficult to compete with these low-price products. Hungary will suffer unless these issues are reflected.
Oh, no,
The
that's a good
CAP
point. That's a good point because, you know, you could say, you know, remember the Copenhagen criteria for membership in the European Union that was expressed in I think 1990 to the member state, to the former communist countries. If you want to join the European Union, you have to have rule of law, whatever that means. You have to have a democratic political system that respects the rights of minorities. And you also have to have an economic, you have to adopt the laws of the European Union. And you also have to have a market economy that's functioning, that's able to adapt and compete within the European Union. Which means you have to create local, it's not clear what that means. It's a very general statement. One of the ways I interpret that to mean is that it implies that you have to have local companies and enterprises in Hungary, in Poland, in Bulgaria, in Romania, in Estonia, in Czech Republic that are able to thrive and compete with French companies, Italian companies, German companies, Belgian companies. And that means you need to create, in effect, Hungarian national champions or Bulgarian national competitors or Romanian national companies that can survive competition with French companies, Belgian companies, German companies, Italian companies. Because you're all now part of the single market. Everybody's supposed to have access to everybody else's national markets, right? In the single economic market, the European Union. So how do you have to create those national competitors? You have to create national Hungarian agricultural companies that are able to compete and continue to exist in competing with Danone in France. For example, the French big agricultural company. Which means you have to build that Hungarian company. Which means you have to use political power of the government to encourage that to emerge. And that's a political process. And if you don't allow that to happen, you will have a nationalist backlash in Hungary as Hungarians say, we joined the European Union, and then the French and Belgian and Italian and German companies came in and they put everybody else out of business and bought everything and own all the land and own all the factories. And our economic well-being of Hungarians and Bulgarians and Romanians is all in the hands of people living in Brussels and business managers in Paris and CEOs in Frankfurt. We hate the European Union. We don't want to be part of the European Union. You don't want that to happen. You will have a nationalist backlash. So you have to create large Hungarian agricultural companies that are able to thrive in competing with French and Belgian and Italian and German agricultural companies. And they have to be created out of the remnants of communism. Like I told you, when communism fell, still 1/3 of these populations were still farmers. So that meant their farms were little tiny little plots of land this big. That's not going to survive. You have to aggregate these plots of land, and you have to create large Hungarian farm companies, like exist in U.S., Cargill, Anheuser. There are lots of different companies like that. Danone in France that can thrive and compete in the European Union, or else you will have a nationalist backlash in reaction to the European integration. But the European Union doesn't come out and say that. They don't say what I just told you. That's my inference. But it's clear. It's clear. Even if it's implicit. Jarno, group 4, what did your groups come up with?
Yeah, I would say our statement is definitely along the line of the statement of group 2. We do feel that the problems with the common agricultural policy definitely reflect on the European Union. Although the European Union does have incomparably higher numbers than like any other international organization, I still say that they're like the quality of their democracy is not where it has to be, considering what the European Union should be. Because we just wanted to say there's definitely still a deficit in the democracy of the European Union.
But you can always say, that's a good point. You can always say there always is a deficit. I mean,
Yeah.
if you belong to a minority group in Belgium or a minority group in the United States, let's say somebody belongs to the transgender community and they feel oppressed and abused by society around them, they're probably going to think that there's a democratic deficit. I mean, you're never going to have complete happiness with the political system in terms of participation and the perception that my voice and my rights are respected, my voice is heard. There's always going to be unhappy groups. The question is, are these disputes resolved peacefully?
I guess I'd say so, yeah.
Okay, so we're running out of time.
Always, yeah. But most of the time, definitely, because yeah, there's never 100% success rate, I feel, in a democracy. But like for the most part, they do come true.
It's a project. It's a project. Okay, so let's go back to the lesson plan and remind us what the debate topic is, because we're running out of time. So you're in your 4 groups. So groups 1 and 2, if this comes up heads, you're a pro. If it comes up tails, you're a con. So groups 1 and 2, if it's heads, you're pro, tails, you're con. So let me make sure that I'm sharing the screen and like this. So heads, group 1 and 2 is pro, tails 1 and 2 is con. Heads is the heads. Look at the George Washington. You see George Washington there? That's head, okay? And it's tails. So group 1 and 2, you are con. Group 3 and 4, you are pro. Group 3 and 4 is pro on the debate topic. And the debate topic is, this is group 3 and 4. And con is group 1 and 2. And like this, and like this. And so to South Koreans, the European Council determines what the parameters of democratic political participation should mean in the European Union. The European Council is the meeting of the prime ministers and presidents, the top leaders of the member states. That's the European Council. Does the European Council determine what the boundaries or limits or the meaning of democratic political participation should mean in the European Union? So back to our groups and go. And so the second person will now be the chair. The second person. So in group 1, it's Tang Hyun Kwan is chair. In group 2, it's Kim Hyun Chol. In group 3, it is Kinara, is chair. In group 4, it is Lee Hyun Ji. Join the groups. Come up with a statement. Lee Hyun Ji, where are you? Kim Hyun Chol, where are you? Kim Hyun Chol, group 2. Kim Hyun Chol, Kim Hyun Chol. 3 and 4 is pro, 1 and 2 is con. On this topic. Come up with a statement. Second person is now the chair. Where's Kim Hyun Chol?
독립적으로 EU에 관련된 거를 하는 것보다는 자기네들 나라
European Council is it affecting European Parliament policy?
그것이 민주주의를 발전할 수 있는 요소라고 이야기를 했었어요.
저는 반대를 했었는데, 잠시만요.
Yeah, so we already discussed this topic. We have put some statements.
Okay, group 4, let's start with group 4. Lee Hyun-ji, for group 4, what is your group statement regarding pro?
Well, we first said that EU is still in the process of improving the quality of democracy, and national parliaments of each consecutive member states can intervene in some decisions that are made and can also participate in the process of any future European Union treaty amendments. But when big decisions are being made on organizations like in wide topics, it is still in the European Council that has ultimate decisions in their hand. So we said that as European councils are the one who's controlling and identifying, taking decisions on legislations on publicly and taking responsibility on deciding such political participation in the EU. We said that controlling or identifying the democracy towards European countries eventually indicates that they are the ones to decide the political participation.
Good, good. I mean, look, you see it right now with this coronavirus pandemic response, economic stimulus package. That was decided by the European Council. Then the European Council, pushes the European Parliament to agree because the European Parliament has to approve it. But it seems like, what would they do if the European Parliament said no? And they expect the European Parliament is not going to say no. And if the European Parliament says no, they will make them change their mind because the members of the European Parliament still respond to their national communities that they represent. I mean, the German members of the European Parliament if the German government wants them to do something, they're going to listen. Even if they might not do it, they always pay attention. When Angela Merkel asks them to do something in the European Parliament, they listen, right? They still want to get reelected to their positions as members of the European Parliament. And most German voters for the European elections, whether it be for the national government or the European Parliament government, expect the European Parliament members for Germany to represent and defend the interests of Germany, along with other values as well. But again, you see this liberal intergovernmentalist approach and emphasized at the beginning of the semester. Again, it's the Council, the European Council, that is the big dog in the room, right? Group 1 and 2, who will speak for group 1 and 2? So 1 is heads, and it is tails. So Horyang or Songmin Ju, who's speaking for group 2? Young? Okay, go.
So we talk about this a little bit, but compared to other European institutions, European Council is a little bit less neutral, because they consist of like head of government each state. So we thought it's like they determine the parameter of democratic political participation, but it's not really work well because they are the actor of the European Council, but also they are head of the state or government, so they have a little bit difficult position. So they cannot be 100% concentrate the EU situation because they also have to think about their own public opinion.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, that was the point in the exercise on fascism we did last class. More common than is for nationalist values to associate with liberal values. And that's what's emphasized in liberal intergovernmentalism. These are nationalists associating their national interests with liberal values, including cooperation, coordination, and collaboration in the European Union to address their interests and needs. All right. Okay, so we're running out of time, and so I think Lee Hyun-ji for Group 4. What did you come up with?
I just presented a few minutes ago.
Oh, okay. Kinara, what did you come up with for Group 3?
Okay. The EU considers the impacts of enlargement on integration to make efficient and rapid decisions in various areas. So if expanded, it is necessary to gather many members, and integration requires more closer cooperation as it has already been integrated. But if the European Commission has no right to directly modify or negotiate directly on the agreement. So the EU Council determines the parameters of democratic political participation should mean the EU.
Okay, and group, who's left? Group Tang Hyun Kwan.
Yeah, we focus in EU and EU country side. So European EU go to United States and Europe, but they acknowledge profit member states. So European and no matter how powerful the European Council is very powerful, but they affecting European Parliament. So the way because they know it member state profit and the EP's electric EU invitation. So we focus in EU and EP. They affecting European Council.
Okay, So now we have to close this and to finish up with a poll. So our last poll is who won the week 11 debate? Okay, that's the poll. So 12 of 12 are pro. Okay, and 2 are con. All right, well, that's it for today. And I'm going to end the class. Okay. See you in US foreign policy, a lot of you. Bye.